Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Brent Scholar, and we're doing our Are We There Yet interview today with John Janizik. He is a program coordinator at ASU, and he's going to tell you a lot more about himself than I can tell you. But we are really looking forward to hearing his perspective about being a student in 2020 when the pandemic started. So welcome, John. It's nice to see you.
Hi, thank you so much, Brent. It's great to be here. I'm happy to be here. So to introduce myself, like you said, I'm a program coordinator for the Student Design Studio in the Office of Applied Innovation at ASU. So that's a mouthful, but really what I do is I lead a student team of really inspiring young students, and we work on economic mobility and academic accessibility in and around ASU's environment. So what can we do to promote access to the wonderful things that we do, and how do we help people get to where they want to be? But on the topic of this today, I was a student not so long ago. I recently graduated with a master's. So I completed my 4+1 in global management from the Thunderbird School of Global Management here at ASU. Before that, I was a bachelor's of interdisciplinary studies. I studied sustainability and applied biology. With that, I was also a member of the Next Generation Service Corps, which is a leadership development program focused on cross-sector collaboration, giving me all the perspectives needed to identify the public, private, and nonprofit intersections of our life. And that segued right through grad school, thinking about the complex world that we live in. But today, I'm happy to be here and looking forward to talking about my experience in the pandemic.
But let's kind of just go back to basics. Like, what was just the overall impact of the coronavirus pandemic on your learning at ASU?
Yeah, I mean, at face value, it was really a shift in environment. I am a type of learner who I enjoy being in class. I enjoy being around other people. I find, the energy that you can share in a room is easy to build off of. And I think that change when the pandemic hit was really impactful towards that sharing of energy, sharing a space, being separate from your peers with, their cameras off, of course, like that can really become a barrier to engaging in meaningful, constructive conversation in the classroom. And that also, kind of bleeds out outside of the classroom. If we're not sharing campus, if we're not sharing a table at the dining hall, then you're at home, you're somewhere, you're disconnected. And I think each of us felt that in the pandemic in our own ways, but from the student experience, it really was quite severing and disengaging because you are met with the same amount of expectation, except in this very, asynchronous environment.
No, just really quickly on that. I mean, since you said there's such a change in that severing, when you said severing, it really like kind of, ooh, right?
Yeah.
So that to me kind of went with mental health a little bit, right? I did my own talk about mental health, so everyone can go see that, but not scientific, like your experience and what you saw about mental health in terms of, was there a deterioration because you weren't doing this interaction or something of that nature, like, that you think might be relevant for our listeners?
My friends, like my peers, right? We are of a generation that is very open to sharing, the troubles that we experience because that's how we build, that's how we heal. And to say, that wasn't improved of a process by being remote and in distance from each other. But I think in some way it also facilitated that conversation, at least to ourselves, to be more present and to be more engaged with ourselves and how we feel and to know to reach out. For example, like my peers, my group of friends, we play online, we're gamers. And so that was a way to help us stay connected remotely, right? And so I can only speak from that perspective because we were able to have the tools in the environment and the social group to stay, connected and conversational. But for those who don't have that conduit, don't have that social outlet, I don't know. I could only imagine that it was more difficult, that there were barriers to engaging with each other because there wasn't that kind of level set of, hey, we're already going to be online talking anyways, let's check in and make sure everyone's doing okay. But that, again, that was unique to my experience. And so
Of course.
I know for those who aren't engaged in that, it might have been, much more difficult.
You were a student who was unique because you did some online classes, you did in-person classes, but now you're switching from that face-to-face learning hybrid, right, to
Mhm.
all online learning. So
Yeah.
what was that transition like for you?
I have a great example for that. I was a botanist at the time. I was taking a botany class and we were in the lab. We were taking cuttings and working in the greenhouse. And when the pandemic hit, everything was completely flipped. It was no longer being in person, no longer in the greenhouse, but it turned into a series of YouTube videos that were, at the professor's discretion, applicable to our content at the time. Any of our exams or lectures were then to be, simple multiple choice questions online, which to the mental health perspective was really beneficial because it's no longer you're sitting in a testing environment and having to go through these rigorous exams, but at the same time, in reflection of the quality of the learning, obviously very different. It's not being entrenched in the dirt, literally touching these plants and doing these things and seeing it in physical form, but very much removed, very broad, which again is just a different approach, but a very, I think, unique one given the nature of the subject.
No, absolutely. Yeah, things are different, right? It's not equal, right? But
Right.
but it's still learning and it still can happen. And yeah, to go from that hands-on must have been very, very difficult. So thank you for sharing that really good example. So and maybe that was one of the challenges, right? Did you have any other challenges or anything like that that arose from the pandemic that you experienced or your peer group that you saw experience?
Yeah. The challenges are also kind of the benefits. I'm an optimistic person when it comes to that. But I say, that in the context of communication, being asynchronous, being disconnected, not being able to convene in a room is challenging to communicating, as anyone would know. And in grad school, right, that's heavily focusing on our group projects. And in an international space like Thunderbird, I was on call with students from Nairobi, from Seoul, South Korea, and I'm in Arizona. So we have these multiple time zone calls, which one never would have happened years ago, but also now is like, as beautiful as that is, it's still a challenge because you're not face to face. You're not feeling, that energy or, as we call it, the vibes, right, of what those other people are trying to say. And so
Mhm.
these physical or like body language things, like that's a challenge. And I can only think that that could persist as we kind of return to normalcy or return to in-person, is that we've become so used to having our cameras off, being able to disengage. And maybe that's out of a place of self-soothing and trying to, be calm or find ourselves, in comfort in this trying time. But at the same time, the ramifications that has moving forward is that we like that. We like being disengaged, or if you do, or if you, depending on your communication style, right? Like it's a very big change to go from one extreme to the other. And now I think we're contending with, where does that balance lie?
What do you think could have been done either by the universities, your teachers, yourself, right, to enable more effective learning during that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I pause because, the learners are diverse. They're as diverse as the people we are. When I consider like what I could have done to enable my learning more, maybe it is just that kind of sense of like self-discipline, right? And I think that's a weird way to approach it because no one really likes the concept of, self-discipline or being hard on yourself. But I think those are two different things. And so let me explain. It's like, as we were in the remote work environment, right? Like people obviously, can do what they want in their own space, but that shouldn't become a barrier to the progress of the idea overall. And whether that's in the classroom or the workplace, I think the same idea still stands. And so where the self-discipline comes in is like, maybe you do offer yourself that freedom of, oh, I can wake up, 10 minutes before my shift because I don't have to drive, however long to campus, or,
Mhm.
I can log into class from my bed because that's comfortable. But there's also a sense of self-discipline in which that comfort doesn't consume the ethic, like the work ethic, which again, I don't know if that's the same perspective or a different perspective of others. I think it's just in retrospect, being comfortable with that change and finding that comfort in, our daily lives, however that manifests, is good for ourselves, right? It's good to be comfortable, but then to understand when, some kind of line needs to be drawn or some kind of resolution of, okay, that was the time of which I needed that comfort. Now I have to, just buckle up and say, the outside world isn't that scary. I can go to campus. I can go to class, right? And that, I think, is what I mean by like that sense of discipline, that sense of, self-motivation.